So in 1993, there was such a poor culture of learning and teaching in South Africa that 11 million pupil days were forfeited, and there were 16,000 instances of disruption at schools. 50% of all of these pupil days that were lost and all of these disruptions were in the Gauteng province, at that point known as the PWV. In 1994, only 40% of the adult population could read and write. Only 40% of black students passed matric. In Gauteng, 17% of the schools were without electricity, 32% without water, 8% without toilets, and 58% without any security. And in 1996, only 20% of adult Africans had matric. So that was the situation that the Gauteng provincial government inherited 20 years ago. And obviously, in the first 15 years of government, the focus of the Gauteng provincial government was really on three things. Redress, so trying to look at the whole question of how do we deal with the inequalities in the education system? How do we try to shift financing towards those in African communities, towards the poorest sectors of society? Secondly, it was on the whole issue of trying to create one education department. You would be aware at that time, Gauteng had 17 different education departments. And I once had an opportunity to speak to two colleagues who still work, both of them still work in the Gauteng education department today. And they told me one of them worked in the Transvaal Department of Education district offices in Ekurhuleni, and the other one worked in the former Department of Education and Training, what was formerly known as the Bantu Education Department, district offices, also in Ekurhuleni. They were less than half a kilometer from each other. They did not know that the two departments existed. They had absolutely no idea what each other did, and neither of them had ever been to each other's schools. And that was the situation in 1994. And then the last issue, of course, that consumed a lot of time in the Gauteng provincial government was how do we create the ability for the African population in particular to access schooling? And in particular, how do we create an opportunity for the African population to access secondary schooling? Because while primary schooling was very well provided for by the apartheid government, secondary schooling was something that was not adequately provided for in any way because of all the policies at that time. Now, over the first 15 years, as I said, the emphasis was on creating one education department. The emphasis was on making sure that the budget was equitably distributed across different schools with a skew towards funding of schools in the poorest communities. And they developed this concept of quintiles. It remains today, but it guided funding, so that those in the bottom 3 quintiles, the poorest schools, should get a larger proportion of funding from those in the other 3 quintiles. And then, of course, there was the whole question of trying to deal with the backlogs in infrastructure. I can tell you that some of those challenges remain today. And at this point in time, we are busy in the last 8 schools in this province in eradicating pit toilets. These are schools that we inherited in 2009 from the former Northwest. So some of those problems of infrastructure, we don't have the kinds of problems that they might have in other provinces, but some of those problems still bedevil the system today. And I think that what we can say about those first 15 years, and you may have many issues that you would want to raise around educational quality, and that's something that I will talk about just now. But I think one of the things that we can say is that in those first 15 years, we managed to do what in Western Europe and in North America took them almost 100 years to do, and that is to bring the whole of the working class into the secondary education sector. And if you look at the census results, the 2011 census, in 1995, there were 9.7% of the population in Gauteng who had absolutely no education whatsoever. By 2011, there was only 2.8% of the population in Gauteng had no education whatsoever. And it's important to judge that figure against the fact that every year since 1994, the population of this province has increased by 2.5%. So what that means is that we have not only managed to deal with those who were here at the time, but we've also managed through a whole range of programs to provide education even for those who are migrating into the province.